They say a mother's intuition is a gift, but right now it feels like a curse tightening around my throat. My son hasn't picked up his phone in 4 days. That might not sound like much to some, but for us, it's a lifetime. The last time we spoke, his voice sounded thin, like paper tearing, and he mentioned a secret project he was working on with that woman. Now, I'm standing on his porch, the humid air sticking to my skin, staring at a pile of yellowing mail. Something is rotting inside this house, and I don't think it's the groceries. Before we step through this door and uncover the filth hidden behind these curtains, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You're watching Vintage Vengeance. And today, we're proving that a mother's love is powerful, but her wrath is legendary. Stick around, because what I saw moving in that closet is going to change everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. The silence coming from Andre's house wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It was the kind of quiet that rings in your ears until you want to scream. I'm 60 years old, and I've lived through enough storms to know when the clouds are hiding a tornado. Andre is my only child, my heartbeat. We've been thick as thieves since his father passed, but lately a shadow has been flickering over him. I turn the spare key in the lock, the one he told me to never stop carrying. The door creaked open, and the smell hit me instantly. It wasn't the smell of a bachelor pad, or even a messy kitchen. It was the sterile metallic scent of bleach mixed with something sickly sweet, like overripe peaches left in the sun. Andre! I called out. My voice felt small in the foyer. Baby, it's Mama. I've been calling you for days. My heart is sitting in my mouth. Andre, answer me. No response. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock over the mantel. I walked into the living room, my sensible heels clicking on the hardwood. Everything looked staged. The pillows were fluffed too perfectly. The magazines on the coffee table were aligned with surgical precision. This wasn't Andre. My son is a man of soul and comfort, not a man of cold, hard edges. I moved toward the kitchen and saw 2 glasses of wine sitting on the counter. Both were empty, dried red rings staining the bottom. Then I heard it. Thump. It came from the master bedroom down the hall. A soft, rhythmic dragging sound. Andre, if you're playing a joke on your old mother, it isn't funny. I shouted, though my hand was trembling as I reached into my purse for my heavy flashlight. I pushed the bedroom door open. The bed was unmade, the sheets tossed aside, as if someone had left in a hurry. The air in here was colder, the vent blowing frost into the room. My eyes darted to the walk-in closet. The door was cracked open, just an inch. I saw a sliver of silk, a dress I didn't recognize, snagged in the doorframe. And then the door shifted. It didn't swing, it shuddered. I know you're in there, I whispered, my blood turning to ice. I know someone is breathing behind that wood. I reached out, my fingers hovering over the handle. I expected Andre to jump out and laugh. I expected a burglar to rush me, but as I pulled the door wide, the sight that met me didn't make sense. The closet was empty of clothes. The racks had been stripped bare. Instead, the back wall had been tampered with. A false panel was leaning crookedly, and a pair of eyes, wide, terrified, and familiar, stared back at me from the darkness of the crawl space. But it wasn't Andre. It was Tiana, the woman he'd been seeing. She looked at me, not with relief, but with a look of pure, calculated malice. You shouldn't have come here, Mrs. Vance, she hissed, stepping out of the shadows. Her clothes were pristine, but her hands were stained with something she couldn't wash away. You always did have a habit of overstaying your welcome. Where's my son, Tiana? I stepped back, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Where is Andre? She smiled, and it was the coldest thing I'd ever seen. He's exactly where he belongs. And soon, you'll be joining him in the quiet. The air in the bedroom grew thin, as if Tiana were sucking all the oxygen out of the room just by standing there. I looked at her, really looked at her. Gone was the sweet, soft-spoken girl who had brought me pound cake last Sunday. In her place stood a woman with eyes as hard as flint and a posture that screamed predator. She didn't look like a woman in mourning or a woman in fear. She looked like a woman who had finally finished a very difficult chore. "You're shaking, Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice dropping to a low, mocking croon. "That's the age, isn't it? The frailty. It must be exhausting, carrying all that worry for a man who didn't even mention you in his final moments of freedom." My grip on the flashlight tightened until my knuckles turned white. "Freedom? What are you talking about? Girl, where is Andre? If you've laid a hand on my child, God himself won't be able to hide you from me." Tiana laughed, a sharp, jagged sound that grated against the silence of the house. She stepped fully out of the closet, and I noticed she was wearing Andre's favorite gold chain around her wrist like a trophy. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. That chain was a family heirloom. Andre never took it off. Andre was a dreamer, Tiana said, pacing the length of the rug. But dreams don't pay for the lifestyle I deserve. He thought he was so smart, keeping his little business tucked away in the shadows. He thought he was protecting you by staying silent. But silence is just a vacuum, Mrs. Vance, and I'm very good at filling vacuums. I forced my breathing to steady. I couldn't afford to faint or fall apart. Not now. You did something to him. You trapped him. I saw that panel in the closet. What is behind there? Tiana stopped pacing and looked at the false wall. A flicker of something, greed, perhaps, passed over her face. What's behind there is the truth. The truth about your perfect son and why he hasn't answered your calls. He wasn't avoiding you because he was busy. He was avoiding you because he was ashamed. Ashamed of what? I demanded, taking a step forward despite the screaming alarm bells in my head. Of how easily he let me take it all, she whispered. The accounts, the property deeds, the legacy you worked so hard to build for him. It's all mine now. I didn't even have to force him. A little bit of affection, a few whispered promises, and he handed me the keys to the kingdom. He's gone, Mrs. Vance. He's been gone since the moment I moved in. The betrayal stung worse than any physical blow. She hadn't just taken his belongings. She had exploited his heart, the one thing I told him to guard most fiercely. But something in her story didn't add up. If she had everything, why was she still here? Why was she hiding in a closet when I pulled up? You're lying, I said, my voice gaining a sudden, icy edge. If Andre handed you everything, you'd be on a plane to the islands, not crouching in a crawl space like a rat. You're looking for something. Something he didn't give you. Tiana's smile vanished. Her face twisted into a mask of pure rage. You think you're so sharp. You think because you've lived 60 years, you know how the world works. But you're just an old woman in a big house who's about to realize that her son was a failure. She lunged at me then, her fingers reaching for my throat. I might be 60, but I spent 30 of those years working the floors of a busy hospital, lifting grown men, and moving with purpose. I didn't scream. I didn't cower. I swung that heavy metal flashlight with every ounce of motherly fury I had left in my bones. The heavy casing connected with her temple. With a dull thud, Tiana let out a choked gasp and stumbled back, hitting the edge of the dresser. She slumped to the floor, dazed but not unconscious. I am the one who raised him, I hissed, standing over her, as she groaned. And I am the one who will find him. You think you won? You haven't even seen the beginning of what I'm prepared to do to get my son back. I grabbed a roll of heavy-duty packing tape from Andre's desk and worked with a clinical efficiency. I didn't care about being gentle. I didn't care about being good. By the time I was finished, Tiana was bound hand and foot, a strip of tape silencing her venomous mouth. I turned back to the closet, to the false panel. My heart was thumping so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I reached into the dark space and pulled. The wood gave way, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the foundations of the house. A place that wasn't on the blueprints. "Andre!" I whispered into the dark. From the depths, I heard a faint, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of someone trying to signal for help. The air rising from that hidden staircase tasted like copper and cold concrete. I didn't look back at Tiana as she squirmed on the floor, her muffled grunts sounding like a cornered animal. I had no pity left for her. My world had narrowed down to that rhythmic tapping coming from the belly of the house. I gripped the flashlight and began my descent, each step creaking under my weight like a warning. The stairs were steep and narrow, built with a haste that suggested secrecy over safety. As I reached the bottom, the beam of my light cut through a thick veil of dust. This wasn't a basement. It was a bunker, a reinforced room carved out beneath the master bedroom. My heart nearly stopped when the light landed on a chair in the center of the small space. "Andre!" I gasped, rushing forward. My son was slumped in the chair, his arms bound tightly behind him. A heavy hood was pulled over his head, but I knew those shoulders. I knew the way his chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. I reached out and yanked the fabric away. Andre blinked against the light, his face bruised and his lips parched. When his eyes finally focused on me, they didn't fill with relief. They filled with a soul-crushing terror. "Mama?" "No. Mama, you have to get out of here," he croaked, his voice barely a sandpaper whisper. "She's not alone. You don't understand what they've done." "Hush now," I said, my hands flying to the thick zip ties cutting into his wrists. "I've got Tiana handled. She's upstairs waiting for the devil to collect her. Let's get you out of here." "You don't understand," Andre said, his eyes darting to the corners of the room. "It's not just about the money or the deeds. They're using this place to move things, Mama. Illegal things. Tiana is just the face. Her brother, Malik, he's the one who does the heavy lifting. He's the one who put me down here." My blood turned to liquid nitrogen. Malik! I remembered him. He had been lurking around the edges of Andre's life for months, posing as a security consultant. He was a tall, silent man with a scar running through his eyebrow and a gaze that felt like a physical weight. "Where is he, Andre? Where is Malik?" "He went to get the cleaner," Andre whispered, a tear tracking through the grime on his cheek. "They realized I hadn't signed the final transfer for the warehouse properties. They were going to make me sign today, and then they weren't going to let me walk out, Mama. They've already scrubbed my life. They told everyone I moved to Europe for a fresh start." I looked around the room. On a small folding table sat a stack of documents and a digital tablet. Beside it lay a heavy, jagged piece of rebar, the tool they had likely used to persuade my son. The betrayal was deeper than I could have imagined. They hadn't just tried to rob him. They had attempted to erase his very existence while he was still breathing. I felt a cold, hard-knot form in my gut. For 60 years, I had been the woman who brought soup to the sick and prayed for the wayward. But as I looked at my son's broken face, that woman died. Something else, something ancient and merciless, took her place. They want a clean slate. I muttered, my voice sounding foreign even to my own ears. "I'll give them a slate, so clean it'll shine." "Mama, we have to call for help," Andre pleaded, struggling against his bonds. "No," I said firmly, finally snapping the last tie with a pair of heavy shears I found on the table. "No help is coming that doesn't involve a suit and a long wait. By the time they arrive, Tiana and Malik will have slipped through the cracks. We aren't doing this their way." I helped Andre to his feet. He was shaky, but he could stand. I led him to the stairs, but I didn't take him back to the bedroom. I led him to the back exit of the crawl space that led out into the garage. "Stay in the car," I commanded, handing him the keys to my sedan. "Lock the doors. If you hear anything at all, don't come back for me. You drive until you hit the next state. What are you going to do?" I looked back at the house, at the window where Tiana was surely still struggling. "I'm going to finish the secret project she started. She wanted this house to be a tomb. Well, I've always been a very thorough housekeeper." I walked back inside, not as a victim, but as the architect of their undoing. I didn't need a gun. I knew this house. I knew where Andre kept the canisters for his outdoor grill. I knew the faulty wiring in the kitchen that he'd been meaning to fix. And most importantly, I knew exactly how to make a predator feel like prey. I walked back into that bedroom with the steady gait of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Tiana was on the floor, her eyes bulging as she watched me enter. She had managed to shimmy a few feet toward the door, leaving a trail of disarray behind her. I didn't say a word. I pulled a chair from the corner and sat directly in front of her, the heavy metal flashlight resting across my lap like a scepter. I reached out and ripped the tape from her mouth in one swift motion. She let out a jagged scream, but I didn't flinch. This neighborhood was quiet, the houses set far apart by old oak trees and secrets. Nobody was coming. "You're a dead woman, Mrs. Vance," she spat, her voice cracking. "Malik is on his way back. He doesn't play games like I do. He'll snap your brittle neck before you can even pray." "Malik isn't here yet," I said, my voice as calm as a graveyard at midnight. And brittle isn't the word I'd use for myself. I've carried the weight of my son's future on my back for 30 years. You've only carried the weight of your own greed. That's a much lighter load, Tiana. I leaned forward, the shadows of the room dancing in the whites of my eyes. "Tell me about the warehouse. Tell me why you needed Andre to sign those papers so badly that you were willing to bury him alive." Tiana sneered, a drop of blood trickling from her temple. "It's a hub, a transition point. We move high-end assets. Art, jewelry, the kind of things people like you only see in movies. Andre was the perfect front. He had the clean record, the legitimate business, the reputation. But he got cold feet. He started asking too many questions about the shipping crates. So you decided to prune the family tree." I whispered. "I decided to upgrade," she countered. "Once those papers are signed, the property is mine. Malik has a buyer lined up who doesn't care about deeds or titles. They just want the space. We were going to be gone by morning." And Andre, Tiana's expression went cold. Andre was a loose end. And you know what we do with loose ends, old woman? We burn them. The sheer arrogance of her words sent a jolt of heat through my veins. She sat there, bound and beaten, still thinking she held the upper hand because of her youth and her brother's shadow. She didn't realize that a mother who has seen her child in a cage is the most dangerous creature on this earth. "You mentioned burning," I said, standing up. "That's an interesting choice of words. Because while you were down in that hole, I noticed something. Andre has a very large supply of industrial cleaning agents in the garage. Solvents. High-grade accelerants for his restoration work." Tiana's bravado flickered. Her eyes darted to the door. "What are you doing?" "I'm tidying up," I replied. I walked over to the closet and looked at the false panel. "You wanted a secret life, Tiana. You wanted a world where nobody could find you. I'm going to give you exactly what you asked for." I began to drag her. She fought, kicking and screaming, but I used her own momentum against her, hauling her toward the hidden staircase. My muscles ached, but the adrenaline acted like a numbing agent. I rolled her down the first few steps, watching as she tumbled into the darkness of the bunker. "Malik will kill you," she shrieked from below. "Malik will find a house that is empty," I shouted down. "And a sister who has simply disappeared, just like you planned for Andre." I went to the kitchen and grabbed a gallon of the heavy-duty solvent I'd seen earlier. I poured it down the stairs, the pungent chemical odor filling the air. I wasn't going to light a match, not yet. I wanted her to sit in the dark, smelling her own and waiting for a brother who was walking into a trap he couldn't see. I checked my watch. Andre would be safe at the designated spot by now. Now, I just had to wait for the cleaner to arrive. I turned off all the lights in the house, sat in the dark living room, and held Andre's gold chain in my hand. The headlights of a black SUV cut through the driveway 5 minutes later. Malik was home. The engine of the SUV cut out, leaving a silence so profound I could hear the cooling metal tick. I watched from behind the heavy velvet curtains as a tall, broad-shouldered figure stepped out. Malik. He didn't look like a man coming home. He looked like a man coming to do a job. He scanned the perimeter with a practiced, clinical gaze, his movements fluid and dangerous. He was carrying a heavy leather duffel bag, the cleaner's kit. I slipped into the shadows of the dining room, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure defiance. I wasn't afraid. Fear is for people who still have something to lose. I had already seen my son in a shroud. Now, I was just the hand of fate. Malik entered through the front door using his own key. He didn't call out for Tiana. He didn't make a sound. He moved through the house like a ghost, his boots barely making a whisper on the wood. He headed straight for the bedroom, likely expecting to find his sister standing over a signed document and a broken man. I followed him, stepping light, keeping my back to the wall. I watched from the hallway as he entered the bedroom and stopped dead. The room was empty. The tape I'd used was gone. The chair was overturned, and the scent of the solvent I'd poured down the stairs was beginning to waft up, thick and choking. "Tiana," he finally whispered, his voice a low rumble. He moved toward the closet, his hand reaching into the small of his back for a weapon. He saw the open panel. He saw the wet sheen of the chemicals on the stairs. "Tiana, what the hell are you doing?" he growled, stepping toward the opening. That was my moment. I didn't rush him. I didn't scream. I reached out and grabbed the heavy, solid oak bedroom door and slammed it shut, throwing the deadbolt I had surreptitiously oiled earlier that hour. Click. Malik spun around, but he was trapped in the master suite. "Mrs. Vance," he called out, his voice dropping the pretense of calm. "I know you're out there. You're making a very big mistake. Open this door, and maybe I'll let you go back to your knitting." "I don't knit, Malik," I said through the wood, my voice steady. "I preserve. I protect. And right now, I'm cleaning house." "Where is my sister?" he barked, throwing his weight against the door. The oak held, but the frame groaned. "She's downstairs, Malik, waiting for you. She told me all about the warehouse. She told me how you were going to erase my Andre. It's funny, isn't it? How quickly the cleaners become the mess." I walked to the kitchen and grabbed the second gallon of solvent. I began to pour it under the bedroom door. I watched as the liquid soaked into the carpet, creeping toward his boots. "What is that smell?" Malik's voice rose an octave. He began to kick at the door with more urgency. "You crazy old hag. You're going to kill us all." "No," I replied, moving down the hall toward the front door. "I'm 60 years old. Malik, I've spent my life being invisible, being the nice lady next door. You forgot that women like me see everything. We see the rot before it spreads, and we know exactly how to cut it out." I stepped out onto the porch and pulled a heavy iron bar through the handles of the double front doors from the outside, effectively sealing the main exit. The house was a fortress, and I was the only one with the map. I walked to my car, which I had moved down the street, and pulled out a small, old-fashioned transistor radio. I turned it up loud, filling the night air with the smooth, soulful sounds of a gospel choir. I wanted them to have a soundtrack for their reckoning. I sat on the hood of my car, watching the house. I knew Malik would try the windows, but Andre had installed reinforced security bars last summer to keep me from worrying about him. Irony is a bitter pill, and I made sure they swallowed every drop. Inside, I could hear the faint sounds of Tiana screaming from the bunker and Malik roaring in the bedroom. They were trapped in the very tomb they had built for my son. But I wasn't done. I hadn't used a single match. I wanted them to sit in that chemical-soaked darkness for a long, long time. I wanted them to feel the walls closing in just like Andre had. "You should have left us alone," I whispered to the wind. "You should have never touched my blood." The gospel music drifted through the trees, a sharp contrast to the muffled thuds coming from inside the house. I sat on the hood of my car, my eyes fixed on the structure I had once seen as a sanctuary for my son. Now, it was a pressure cooker. I watched the windows, waiting for the inevitable moment when Malik realized that muscle and rage were useless against reinforced steel and a mother's resolve. I pulled Andre's gold chain from my pocket. It felt heavy, much heavier than it should. This wasn't just metal. It was a symbol of every shift I worked, every double I took at the hospital to ensure he had a legacy. Tiana had worn it like a cheap trinket. That was her first mistake, treating our history like it was something she could just put on and take off. Suddenly, the screaming stopped. A different sound took its place, the sound of glass shattering. Malik had managed to break one of the inner panes, but the security bars held firm. I saw his shadow move across the bedroom window, a silhouette of desperation. "Mrs. Vance," he bellowed, his voice carrying through the gaps in the frame. "Let's talk. I have information. I have the codes to the offshore accounts Andre didn't even know existed. There's millions, woman. Don't you want to retire in style?" I stood up and walked slowly toward the porch, the music swelling behind me. I didn't stop until I was standing just outside the window, separated from him by only a few inches of brick and iron. "You still think this is about money, Malik?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "That's the difference between us. You see a bank account. I see a bloodline. You think a few zeros on a screen can replace the 4 days of sleep I lost wondering if my son was dead in a ditch? You think style matters to a woman who just had to pull her child out of a hole in the ground." "I'll give you names," he pleaded, his face appearing pressed against the bars. His eyes were watering from the fumes of the solvent. "The people I work for, they won't stop looking for this house. If I don't check in, they'll come for you. They'll come for Andre. Let me out, and I'll make sure you're both ghosted. I'll scrub you from the system." "You've already been scrubbing him, haven't you?" I countered. "Tiana told me. You told the world. He was in Europe. You've already done the hard work for me, Malik. As far as the world is concerned, Andre is gone, and you and your sister never existed in this zip code." I saw the realization hit him. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly gray. He looked down at the floor, where the chemical liquid was still seeping into the wood, turning the expensive finish into a bubbling mess. "What are you going to do?" he whispered, the bravado finally extinguished. "I'm going to do what any good mother does when she finds a nest of copperheads in her garden." I said, "I'm going to make sure they can't bite anyone else." I walked away from the window and headed toward the garage. I didn't need the millions he was offering. I didn't need his codes. I needed the ledger I'd seen in the bunker, the one Tiana was so desperate to hide. I went back through the garage entrance, avoiding the fumes by wrapping a wet cloth around my face. I descended into the bunker once more. Tiana was curled in a ball at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes wide and bloodshot. She tried to speak, but the chemical air made her cough violently. I ignored her. I went straight to the table and grabbed the tablet and the physical ledger. I flipped through the pages. It wasn't just art and jewelry. It was a log of human lives, workers brought in under false pretenses, held in places just like this before being shipped to the warehouse. My son hadn't just been a victim of a robbery. He had been a witness to a horror he couldn't comprehend. And these two were the gatekeepers of that misery. "You're not just thieves," I said, looking down at Tiana. "You're monsters." I took the ledger and the tablet and headed back up. As I reached the top, I heard a car door slam down the street. Not my car. Not the SUV. A third player had arrived. The music from my car radio continued to play, but it felt like the air had suddenly gone vacuum sealed. I peered through the slats of the garage door, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A sleek, silver sedan had pulled up 100 yards away, tucked under the weeping willow tree. A man stepped out. He wasn't like Malik. He wasn't a bruiser. He was dressed in a sharp, slate-colored suit that looked like it cost more than Andre's car. He didn't rush. He didn't look around. He walked with the terrifying confidence of a man who owned the ground he stepped on. This was the buyer Tiana had mentioned, the one who didn't care about deeds, only the space. I retreated into the shadows of the garage, clutching the ledger to my chest. If he found me here, with Malik and Tiana locked inside a chemical trap, the story would end very differently. I needed to move, and I needed to move fast. I crept back toward the main house through the connecting laundry room. I could hear Malik banging on the bedroom floor. Now, a desperate, rhythmic thumping. He must have heard the car, too. He was trying to signal his boss. "Malik, in here." Tiana's voice rose in a ragged, chemical-choked scream from the bunker. I didn't have much time. I reached into the utility closet and grabbed a heavy-duty master lock. I didn't just want them trapped. I wanted them silent. I moved to the kitchen and turned on the gas burners of the stove. I didn't light them. I just let the hiss fill the air, joining the scent of the solvents. I slipped out the side door, just as the man in the suit reached the front porch. I watched from the thick hydrangea bushes as he tested the iron bar I'd wedged through the door handles. He didn't look frustrated. He looked amused. He pulled a phone from his pocket. "The house is sealed from the outside," he said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as cold. "It seems our friends have run into a bit of local resistance. No, don't send the crew. If the assets are compromised, we follow protocol. Burn the ledger, burn the witnesses. I'll be at the secondary site." He turned on his heel and walked back to his car. He didn't even try to help them. To him, Malik and Tiana were just discarded equipment. My blood ran cold. Burn the witnesses. He wasn't talking about the house. He was talking about the entire trail. That meant Andre. That meant me. And if he thought the ledger was still inside that house, he'd be sending someone back to make sure nothing but ash remained. I waited until his taillights vanished before I sprinted to my car. Andre was waiting 2 miles away at the Old Baptist Cemetery, the one place I knew nobody would look for a living soul. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands shaking so hard I could barely fit the key in the ignition. I threw the car into reverse and roared away, the gospel music finally cutting out as I moved out of range. I found Andre sitting on a stone bench near his father's grave. He looked older, smaller, the moonlight casting deep shadows in the hollows of his cheeks. When he saw my car, he stood up, his eyes searching mine for a sign of what I'd done. "Mama, is it over?" "No, baby," I said, handing him the ledger. "It's just getting started. Tiana and Malik were just the hands. The head of this snake is wearing a 3-piece suit and driving a silver Mercedes. And he thinks he's going to burn us out. Andre opened the ledger, his eyes scanning the names and dates. His face went pale. Mama, do you know what this is? These aren't just shipping logs. These are the records for the syndicate. They move people through the warehouse properties. If they know we have this. They already know, I said, looking back toward the glow of the city. But they think it's in the house. And they think Tiana and Malik are the only ones who can talk. What do? We have to go to the authorities. I looked at my son, my sweet, honest boy, and I felt a surge of protective rage. The authorities have paper trails, Andre. Paper trails can be bought. These people don't play by rules, so neither will I. They want a fire. I'm going to give them an inferno they can't put out. I reached into the back seat and pulled out my old map of the county. I pointed to a spot on the edge of the river, the warehouse district. They're coming to finish the job at the house. I whispered. While they're busy looking for us in the smoke, we're going to hit them where it hurts. We're going to take their assets and turn them into liabilities. The drive to the river was silent. Andre held the ledger in his lap like it was a live grenade. The city lights flickered in the distance, but down by the docks, the world was draped in a suffocating velvet. This was the underbelly, the place where the cleaners and the buyers did their business while the rest of the world slept. Mama, this is suicide, Andre whispered as we pulled into the shadow of a rusted shipping container. That man in the suit, he isn't like Malik. He has an army. We should take this book and run. Run where, Andre? I looked at him, my grip firm on the steering wheel. If we run, we spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. Every time a car slows down, every time the phone rings, you'll feel that hood over your head again. I didn't raise you to live in a cage, and I'm too old to start running now. I stepped out of the car. The air here smelled of salt, diesel, and secrets. I grabbed a heavy crowbar from the trunk and a bottle of high-proof moonshine I'd kept in the cellar for medicinal purposes. They think I'm an old woman crying over a lost house. I muttered. They don't realize I've spent 40 years navigating the bureaucracy of a hospital. I know how to find the pulse of an organization, and I know exactly where to squeeze to stop the heart. We approached Warehouse 42. It was a massive, windowless slab of concrete. There were no guards at the door. They relied on the reputation of the buyer to keep people away. But I saw the cameras. I saw the way the perimeter was swept by infrared lights. The ledger says the transfer happens at 3 a.m., I said, checking my watch. It was 2:15. They're clearing out the evidence because they think the house is about to go up in flames. They think the trail ends with Malik and Tiana. What's the plan? Andre asked, his voice shaking but his eyes finally showing a spark of his mother's fire. We aren't going in the front, I said. Every warehouse this size has a ventilation system and a drainage bypass. I saw the blueprints in your office months ago when you were bidding on the restoration. The back dock has a service hatch that leads directly to the climate-controlled storage. We moved through the shadows like twin ghosts. I felt a strange surge of energy. My joints didn't ache. My vision was sharp. It's amazing what a little vengeance can do for the Constitution. We found the hatch. It was secured with a heavy chain, but the metal was pitted with rust from the river air. One well-placed strike with the crowbar, and the link snapped. We slipped inside. The interior was vast and chillingly quiet. Row after row of wooden crates filled the floor. But as we moved deeper, I realized these weren't crates of art or jewelry. I heard a soft moan, then a cough. I pulled back a heavy tarp. Behind it was a row of small partitioned rooms, cages really fitted with thin mattresses. There were people inside, men, women, and children, their faces pale and eyes hollow. They weren't assets. They were a harvest. My God, Andre breathed, his hand flying to his mouth. Tiana, she told me it was high-end goods. She said it was just smuggling. She lied to you about everything. Andre, I said, my heart turning to a shard of ice. They didn't just want your property. They wanted your silence because you were the perfect cover for a human graveyard. I looked at the people in the shadows. They looked at me with a mix of terror and a tiny, flickering hope. I'm not the law, I told them, my voice carrying through the cold air. The law is slow. The law is complicated. I am just a mother who is very, very angry. In 10 minutes, those doors are going to open. When they do, you run toward the river. There are boats docked at the pier. Take them. Don't look back. I turned to Andre. Find the main power grid. Shut down the cameras and the electronic locks. I'm going to find the man in the slate suit. Mama, no. He's here, Andre. I can smell his expensive cologne over the rot. He's the head of the snake, and I'm going to make sure he never wears a suit again. I left my son and moved toward the glass-walled office overlooking the warehouse floor. I saw him. The man in the slate suit was sitting at a desk, calmly checking his watch. He had a glass of scotch in one hand and a lighter in the other. He was waiting for the call that the house and my life had been erased. I didn't sneak. I walked right up to the glass and tapped on it with the crowbar. He looked up, his eyes widening in a rare moment of genuine shock. He didn't reach for a gun. He just stared as if he were seeing a ghost. You're late for the fire, I said, the words echoing through the intercom. So I decided to bring the heat to you. The man in the slate suit didn't panic. He sat back, his shock dissolving into a thin, oily smirk. He set his scotch down and pressed a button on his desk. I must say, Mrs. Vance, your resilience is unexpected. Most women your age are settling into a rocking chair, not breaking into high-security facilities. But you've made a fatal tactical error. You've come to me. I didn't come to you for a chat, I said, my voice vibrating with a frequency that felt like it could shatter the glass between us. I came to show you the ledger you're so worried about. I held up the book. His eyes tracked it like a hawk. That book is my property, and while I admire the theatrics, you're standing in a room with 12 armed men who are currently rounding up your son in the loading bay. You have nothing. You think so? I smiled, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine doubt in his gaze. I told my son to kill the power, but I didn't tell him to do it just to hide the cameras. I told him to do it because the fire suppression system in this warehouse is linked to the main grid. When those lights go out, the emergency locks engage. Nobody gets in. And nobody, not even a man in a slate suit, gets out. Right on cue, the warehouse plunged into darkness. The only light came from the red emergency strobes, casting a rhythmic, bloody glow over the floor. You're bluffing, he hissed, standing up. He reached into his desk, but I was faster. I swung the crowbar with a lifetime of pent-up exhaustion and rage, shattering the glass office wall. Shards of crystal rained down like diamonds in a coal mine. I stepped through the frame, the crunch of glass under my shoes the only sound in the room. I'm 60, Julian. That's the name on the ledger, right? Julian Thorne. I've seen enough life to know that men like you aren't brave. You're just insulated. You hide behind Malik, behind Tiana, behind layers of concrete and silver cars. I unscrewed the cap of the moonshine bottle and began to pour it over his mahogany desk, over his expensive rug, and over the stack of fake passports sitting in his outbox. What are you doing? He barked, his voice finally cracking. I'm auditing your accounts. I said, you wanted to burn my son's life? You wanted to turn a man into a loose end. I'm showing you what a loose end looks like when it catches a spark. Below us, in the warehouse, I heard the sounds of the cages opening. I heard the low, guttural roar of the people Julian had treated like cattle. They weren't running for the river yet. They were moving toward the office. They had heard my voice. They had seen the red lights. And they knew exactly who was responsible for their chains. Julian looked over the railing and saw the sea of shadows moving toward him. His armed men were nowhere to be seen, likely trapped in the loading bay by the emergency locks Andre had triggered. "You can't do this!" Julian screamed, backing away toward the window. "There are protocols. There are rules." "The protocol changed the moment you touched my Andre," I said. I pulled out a small, silver lighter, the one I'd taken from Andre's kitchen. I didn't flick it. I just held it up. "You told your people to burn the witnesses." "Well, Julian, the witnesses are right outside your door. And they look very, very hungry for justice." I turned my back on him and walked toward the back exit of the office, the one that led to the roof. "Wait, don't leave me here," he pleaded, the sound of the office door being kicked and echoing through the room. "I'm not leaving you," I said, looking back one last time. "I'm just stepping out of the way. My son is waiting for me, and unlike you, I have a home to go to." I flicked the lighter and dropped it into the pool of moonshine. The blue flame sprinted across the floor like a racer. As I climbed the ladder to the roof, I didn't look back at the fire. I looked at the stars, feeling the cold night air wash away the scent of bleach and betrayal. The roof of the warehouse was cold, but the heat rising from the vents felt like a final, cleansing breath. I stood at the edge, watching the silver sedan, Julian's pride and joy, sitting idle and useless in the gravel lot. Down below, shadows flooded out of the side exits. The people Julian had caged were vanishing into the night, ghosts reclaiming their lives. I saw Andre standing by my car, his face illuminated by the flickering orange glow coming from the office windows. He looked up, and for the first time in a week, the weight of the world wasn't crushing him. I descended the fire escape, my movements steady. I didn't look back at the warehouse. I didn't need to see the end of a man like Julian. The fire I started was small, but the fire I stoked in the hearts of those he'd oppressed was a conflagration he couldn't survive. There would be no news reports about a heroic grandmother. There would be no foundations in my name. To the world, Warehouse 42 would be a mysterious industrial accident, and Julian Thorne would simply be another wealthy man who disappeared into his own darkness. I reached the ground and walked to Andre. He didn't ask what happened. He just opened the door and let me slide into the passenger seat. We drove away as the first sirens began to wail in the distance, far too late to save anything that mattered to the syndicate. We didn't go back to his house. That place was tainted by the scent of Tiana's greed and the shadow of the closet. We went to my home, the small brick house with the porch swing and the rose bushes that needed pruning. We sat in the kitchen, the sun beginning to peek over the horizon, turning the sky a bruised purple. I took the gold chain from my pocket and placed it on the table between us. "It's over, Andre," I said, my voice finally cracking with the exhaustion I'd been fighting. "You saved me, Mama," he whispered, reaching out to take my hand. "But what we did, the house, the warehouse, we didn't do anything but survive." I told him, my eyes hard and clear. "The world is a garden, son. Sometimes you have to pull the weeds by the roots so the flowers can breathe. We're going to sell your place. We're going to take that ledger to the one person I know who can't be bought, an old friend from the ward who knows how to leak secrets to the right predators. And then we're going to forget those names ever existed." I stood up and walked to the window. The neighborhood was waking up. Birds were singing. The world looked exactly the same, but I was different. I was 60 years old, and I had learned that peace isn't the absence of war. It's the strength to finish it. My son was safe. My legacy was intact. And the closet in that house was finally, mercifully, empty. They say you should never provoke a woman who has lived long enough to know where the bodies are buried, especially if she's the one who had to dig the hole. Andre is back in my kitchen. The silence is finally peaceful, and the predators who thought we were easy prey are nothing but smoke in the wind. Justice didn't come from a gavel. It came from a mother who refused to let her son become a ghost. If this story chilled you to the bone, make sure you smash that like button. Real vengeance doesn't happen in a courtroom. It happens in the shadows when the world thinks you're too old to fight back. Leave a comment below with the word relentless if you'd go to the ends of the earth for your family. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out our other stories of cold, hard justice on the screen right now. Stay sharp, because you never know who's watching from the closet.